I raised my grandson from the time he was 2 years old. I changed his diapers. I taught him to ride a bike in the driveway on a Saturday morning when the pavement was still wet from the night before. I was there when he lost his first tooth and cried because he thought something was wrong with him. I was the one who held him. My son never came back. That's the part people don't understand when I try to explain it. They hear your son left his child with you and they picture a weekend. A week, maybe. A rough patch. They picture a young man who made a mistake and eventually found his way home. My son left his boy in my kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon in October, said he needed to handle something, and drove away in a truck that wasn't even his. I stood at the window and watched the taillights disappear at the end of my road. My grandson, I'll call him Miles because that's his name, was sitting on the linoleum floor playing with a plastic dinosaur. He didn't even look up. That was 11 years ago. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I am 67 years old. I spent 32 years working maintenance for the county, roads, drainage, equipment. I am not a complicated man. I don't have a lawyer on retainer. I don't have connections or money or any particular advantage in this world. What I have is a house I paid off in 2019, a 1998 Ford that runs clean, a neighbor named Gus who has been my closest friend since we were both in our 40s, and a grandson who calls me Pop. What I did not have until recently was any idea that any of this could be taken from me. My son's name is Derek. He was 24 when he left Miles with me. I won't pretend he was ever stable. He wasn't. His mother, my late wife Norma, used to say Derek came into the world with the volume turned all the way up and never found the knob. She said it with love. She always said everything about him with love, even the hard things. Norma passed when Derek was 19. I think that broke something in him that never fully mended. He drifted. Jobs that lasted a month. Phone numbers that changed without warning. Addresses I couldn't keep track of. And then one day, he showed up with a woman I had never met and a 2-year-old boy who had Norma's eyes exactly. He told me the boy's mother was gone. I didn't push on what that meant. I could see the state Derek was in. And I knew that pushing wasn't going to produce anything useful. He ate at my table that evening, put Miles to bed in the spare room, and in the morning he was gone. I called his number 17 times in the first week. 11 of those calls went straight to voicemail. The other 6 just rang. After 30 days, I stopped counting. I enrolled Miles in the pre-K program at the elementary school on Clement Road and started figuring out how to be a father again at 56 years old. It was harder than I expected and easier than I feared. Miles was a quiet child, a little watchful, the way kids are when they've seen things they don't have words for yet. But he took to routine. He liked cereal with the exact same amount of milk every morning. He liked being read to at night. He liked helping me in the yard, handing me tools even when he didn't know what they were for, just so he could be next to me. By the time he was 5, he had stopped asking about his father. I don't know how to tell you what that felt like. I'm not going to try. The years went by the way years do when you're busy. Miles started school. Miles learned to read. Miles joined the junior wrestling program at the rec center and came home smelling like the gym mats and grinning like he'd won something important. I went to every match. I sat in those plastic bleacher seats with my knees aching, and I cheered. I heard from Derek 4 times in 11 years. Once was a collect call from a facility in another state. I accepted it. We talked for 8 minutes. He cried. I listened, and then he was gone again. Once was a postcard from somewhere in the Southwest with no return address. Once was a text message on Christmas Eve that said only, "Sorry, Pop," and when I wrote back, the number was already disconnected. The 4th time was a certified letter from an attorney's office in Stillwater. That letter arrived on a Friday morning in February. I remember because I had just gotten back from Miles's school. He had a band concert the night before. He plays the trumpet. He's actually not bad. And I was standing in the kitchen still in my coat when I opened it. The letter informed me that my son Derek, acting through his attorney, a man named Clifton Webb, was seeking immediate custody of his minor child, Miles, and requesting that I cease and desist any further interference in their reunion. It also stated that if I did not voluntarily surrender the child within 14 days, my son would be forced to pursue legal action, including but not limited to charges of custodial interference and unlawful detainment. I read it 3 times. The third time I was sitting down. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment. But the truth is, I didn't feel anything right away. It was like when you cut yourself with a sharp blade. There's a second, sometimes 2 or 3 seconds, where you can see the cut and you know it happened. But the pain hasn't arrived yet. That was how I felt standing in my kitchen holding that letter. I could see what it said. I just hadn't felt it yet. Then Miles came through the front door with his backpack and said, "Pop, can I have a snack?" And I folded the letter and put it in my coat pocket and said yes. I called Gus that evening after Miles was in bed. Gus is not a man who panics easily. He spent 20 years in the trades, built houses from the ground up, dealt with inspectors and contractors and people who tried to shortchange him at every turn. When I read him the letter over the phone, there was a long silence, and then he said, "Do you have documentation?" I asked him what he meant. He said, 11 years, you've been raising this kid. Do you have anything written down? Anything that shows Derek left him with you intentionally?" I started thinking. Gus stayed on the line while I thought. The truth was, I had more than I realized. I had Miles's medical records going back to his first pediatric visit in November of the year Derek left, with me listed as legal guardian. I had his school enrollment papers from pre-K, which I had signed. I had every report card, every immunization record, every form I had ever filled out on his behalf. I had a drawer in the spare bedroom, the room that was now Miles's room, that I had never organized, but that was full of paper. I also had something else. 3 months after Derek left, when it became clear he wasn't coming back on his own timeline, I had gone to see a lawyer in town. Not about custody, not formally. I just needed to know what I was supposed to do. The lawyer, a woman named Paulette, had told me to put everything in writing. She had helped me draft a letter, just a simple letter, and she had sent it to Derek's last known address and to 2 other addresses I had for him. The letter stated clearly that Derek had voluntarily left Miles in my care, that I intended to raise him, and that I was requesting confirmation or objection within 30 days. She had sent it certified mail. Derek had signed for one of the copies. He had never responded. Paulette had kept a copy of everything. I still had the files she had sent me. It was in a manila envelope in the bottom of the drawer in the kitchen, under a phone book from 2016 that I'd never thrown away. When I found it and called Gus back, he said, "That's your envelope." The next 2 weeks were the worst of my life, and I have had some bad weeks. Derek and his attorney filed the legal action on a Wednesday. By Thursday afternoon, there were 2 people from the county's child services department at my door. They were polite. They were doing their job. I understand that. But standing in my own doorway while 2 strangers asked me to describe my living situation, my finances, my daily routine, while Miles was upstairs doing homework, something in me went cold in a way that took a long time to thaw. They interviewed Miles separately, in the living room, while I sat in the kitchen. Miles is 13. He knows things. He's not a baby who can be redirected with a juice box. When the woman came back into the kitchen, she had a careful expression on her face, and she said Miles had been very cooperative and very clear about his feelings. She didn't tell me what he'd said. She didn't have to. After they left, Miles came and sat across from me at the kitchen table. He looked at me with those eyes that are so much his grandmother's that it still catches me sometimes, and he said, "Pop, I'm not going anywhere." I said, "I know." He said, "I mean it." He doesn't know me. He's been gone my whole life. I don't care who he is. I didn't know what to say to that, so I got up and made dinner, and we didn't talk about it anymore that night. But I heard him. I heard every word. The hearing was set for the following month. Gus drove me because I didn't want to sit in a parking garage and try to find a meter and think about parking. I needed someone who could handle the practical things while I dealt with the rest. We got there early. I sat on a bench in the hallway outside the courtroom, in a jacket I hadn't worn since Norma's funeral. The jacket still fit, but it felt strange, like wearing someone else's life. Gus sat beside me and didn't try to make conversation, which is one of the reasons I had been friends with him for 20 years. Derek arrived with his attorney 12 minutes before the hearing. I hadn't seen my son in 11 years. He looked older, which is obvious, but not in the way I expected. He'd filled out. He was dressed carefully. New clothes, hair combed. He had the look of a man who had been coached, which I suppose he had. He glanced at me when he came in, and then looked away. His attorney, Clifton Webb, younger than I expected, expensive shoes, put a hand on Derek's shoulder and steered him past me without making eye contact. I watched my son walk past me and sit down at the table on the other side of the room, and I thought about the collect call from the facility. I thought about him crying. I thought about the text on Christmas Eve. Sorry, Pop. I didn't feel angry. I want to say that clearly because people expect anger in these situations, and I understand why. But what I felt was something older and heavier than anger. It was grief, I think, for something that had never quite existed the way I wanted it to. The judge was a woman named Hargrove. She was direct. She ran the courtroom the way a person runs a courtroom when they've seen everything and they're not going to be impressed by theater. Derek's attorney stood up and made his case. He used words like biological imperative and paternal bond and right to reunion. He talked about Derek's recovery, his stability, his new apartment, his part-time job. He made it sound like 11 years of absence was simply a detour, a rough patch, a man finding his footing. He mentioned briefly that there had been some informal arrangement, but that no legal guardianship had been established, and therefore my claim to the child was not, strictly speaking, legal. That was the word he used. Child. Not by name. Just the child. Then my attorney, a woman named Ruth, who Paulette had referred me to, who had gray hair and reading glasses, and an expression that suggested she had no time for nonsense, stood up. She laid the manila envelope on the table in front of Judge Hargrove. She explained, calmly and without drama, what was in it. The letter from 2014, the certified mail receipt, Derek's signature, the 30-day window that had passed without response, the 11 years of medical records, the school documentation, the tax records in which I had claimed Miles as a dependent every single year with the county's knowledge. Then she said something that I had not known she was going to say. She said, Your Honor, I'd like to note that 3 weeks ago, the plaintiff's attorney sent my client a private communication suggesting that this matter could be resolved without litigation if my client agreed to a payment of $40,000, to be understood as compensation for child care expenses. The courtroom was not loud, but it got quieter. Ruth placed a second document on the table. The communication, printed and dated. Judge Hargrove looked at it. Then she looked at Clifton Webb. Then she looked at Derek. She said, Mr. Myert, Webb, would you like to address this? What followed was not something I will describe in detail because, honestly, it happened fast, and I was watching Derek's face more than anything else. His expression went through several changes in a short period of time. At the end of it, he looked like a man who had been told something he didn't know, and I believe that's exactly what had happened. I don't think Derek knew about the payment offer. I think that was Webb's idea entirely. Judge Hargrove recessed for 20 minutes. When she came back, she was brief. She said that given the documented evidence of long-term voluntary abandonment, the absence of any counter-response to the 2014 letter, the minor child's stated preferences which were consistent with his documented history, and the newly introduced evidence of what appeared to be an attempted financial coercion. She was denying the petition for custody transfer. She was also referring the communication to the Bar Association for review. She looked over her glasses at the room and said, "This child has a home. He has had a home for 11 years. The court sees no reason to disturb that." I put my hands flat on the table in front of me because I needed to feel something solid. Gus took me to the diner on Route 9 after. He ordered the patty melt. I ordered coffee, and then sat there, not drinking it. After a while, I ordered the patty melt too. We talked about other things. His daughter's new house. A truck he was thinking about buying. Whether the road out past the reservoir was going to get repaved this summer. We talked about everything except what had just happened, because we are both the kind of men who need time to come around to the thing itself. Eventually, Gus said, "You doing all right?" I said I thought so. He said, "Miles is a good kid." I said, "He's a great kid." Gus nodded. He picked up his coffee and looked out the window at the parking lot for a while. Then he said, "You know, I think about what would have happened if you didn't have that envelope." I had been thinking about the same thing. I had been thinking about Paulette, who had visited on a Tuesday afternoon in 2014, because I didn't know what else to do. I had been thinking about her advice. Put it in writing, send it certified. Advice I had followed, not because I thought I would ever need it, but because it seemed like the responsible thing. I had been thinking about how thin the line is sometimes between losing everything and keeping it. I told Gus that. He said that's why you write things down. I told Miles that evening. Not all of it, not the details, but enough. I told him the court had ruled in our favor. I told him he wasn't going anywhere. I told him he wasn't going anywhere. I told him that what we had was ours and that no one was going to take it. He sat with that for a minute. Then he said, "What about my dad?" I said, "He's alive. He's out there somewhere. That door isn't closed forever." Miles looked at the floor. He said, "I don't hate him." I said, "I know." He said, "I just don't know him." I said, "That's fair." We left it there. We've gotten good at leaving things where they can rest. That night, after Miles was asleep, I went out to the garage and stood for a while in the dark. I'm not sure what I was doing. Thinking, maybe. Or just being somewhere quiet where nobody needed anything from me for a few minutes. I thought about Norma. I thought about what she would have made of all of it. She would have been furious at Derek. Not the cold fury I'd felt in that courtroom, but a hot, immediate, righteous anger that she wouldn't have tried to contain. But she also would have forgiven him eventually, because that was who she was. She carried both things at once. She always could. I thought about Miles on the floor with his plastic dinosaur the day Derek drove away. 2 years old. Not looking up. I thought about him at the band concert the night before the letter arrived, standing in the third row with his trumpet searching the bleachers for my face. He found it. He always finds it. I went back inside, locked up, and went to bed. In the morning, Miles made his cereal with the exact right amount of milk, and we drove to school together with the radio on, and he jumped out at the curb and said, "Later, Pop," without looking back, the way 13-year-olds do. And I watched him walk through the door and thought, that's mine. That's 11 years of mine. And nobody is taking that. I drove home. I had the window down even though it was cold. The air felt like something I'd earned. Gus called around noon to check in. I told him everything was fine. He said good and asked about the Reservoir Road again, and I told him I'd heard they were starting paving in April. That was enough for one day. That was more than enough. People ask me sometimes if I'm bitter. I think about that question more than I let on. The honest answer is no. And the reason it's no has nothing to do with being a bigger person or rising above it, or any of that language people use when they want to sound like they've figured something out. It's simpler than that. Bitterness requires energy I don't have, and it doesn't build anything I want to live in. What I've learned, not from a book, not from anyone telling me, is that the choices you make when nobody's watching are exactly the ones that save you when everything falls apart in public. In 2014, I went to see Paulette not because I was planning for a courtroom, I went because I didn't know what else to do, and it seemed like the responsible thing. That's it. That's the whole reason. And 11 years later, her advice, put it in writing, send it certified, was the only thing standing between me and losing Miles. I think about that a lot. The version of me who didn't bother, who figured it would all sort itself out, who left the drawer in the kitchen empty. That version of me would have walked into that courtroom with nothing but 11 years of memory and love. And love, as it turns out, doesn't come with a receipt. There's a kind of intelligence that isn't about being smart. It's about paying attention to what matters before you're desperate. It's about doing the small, unglamorous, careful things. Sending a letter, keeping a file, going to see a lawyer on a Tuesday afternoon when you'd rather be anywhere else. Because you understand that the future is real even when it feels far away. Derek never understood that. I'm not saying that to condemn him. I'm saying it because I think it's the thing that split our paths. He moved through life reacting. I tried, imperfectly, to act. And Miles is the part of this I come back to most. He's 13 and he said, without anyone coaching him, without any adult telling him what to feel, I don't hate him. I just don't know him. That kind of clarity at 13, that's not something you can teach directly. It grows in a child who has been treated with honesty, who has been told the truth in age-appropriate pieces, instead of being protected from it until it explodes. I never told Miles his father was a bad man. I never told Miles his father was coming back either. I just told him the truth as I knew it, year by year, in the smallest doses that were still honest. And he grew up with enough ground under him to stand on it. I've seen what happens when people make choices driven purely by what they want in the moment. The money, the reunion, the claim, the appearance of something they never actually built. I've also seen what happens when you just keep showing up. Every wrestling match, every school morning, every evening with the radio on in the truck. It accumulates into something that no lawyer can argue away and no judge can ignore. Not because the universe rewards the good, but because consistent action over time produces evidence. Real, documentable, undeniable evidence of a life actually lived. The envelope saved me. But the envelope only existed because I'd been paying attention for 11 years before I ever needed it. That's the only thing I know for certain. That's the thing I'd tell anyone who's in the middle of it right now, doing the quiet work that nobody sees and wondering if it counts. It counts. Every single day of it counts.